Hello and happy Halloween, everyone. This is Chris Ringler of the Spooky Chris podcast. This is my annual tradition, is to do a Halloween story. If not several, I've written a couple this year, which I'll spread out over a couple of podcasts. Different podcasts, not mine. You hear enough of me as it is. Anyone who might listen, one or two of you. So this is my 2020 story. And without further ado, I'll just jump into it. It is called The Waiting Game. Claudia looked out her apartment window at the world 8 stories below. The snow had been falling for over half an hour now, but the streets were still full of kids. Along with the trick-or-treaters, the police were also out patrolling from their cars, trying to get the kids and their accompanying adults back inside. The year had been a hard one, and the city had canceled all Halloween activities for this year, but the people did what they always seem to do when they're told they are supposed to do something, and that is to do the exact opposite. The streets weren't exactly filled with people, not with the virus still active and having caused 500,000 deaths in the country since June alone. But there were people out, adults parked and partying in lots and from their trunks, and kids trick-or-treating at stores and bodegas and with the park partiers. Some of the kids were with adults. Many weren't, traveling in groups or alone. Where are their goddamned parents? Claudia thought. She clenched her hand into a fist. Where were their parents? And that question burned in her, hotter than any anger at unseen adults she might have had. And she turned from the window with tears in her eyes. Where were their parents? She bashed her closed left fist into the wall and winced at the pain. She looked at the clock, and it was 10 minutes to 9. Almost the end of trick-or-treating, which meant it was almost time for her to be ready. She wiped her tears away and walked through the small living room to her kitchen and grabbed the bag of Choco Moves from the battered table. She sniffed the air and frowned at the smell of fried food and takeout that hung there. She needed to spray something. She noticed a large stain on the linoleum, then another, so she pulled her eyes away. She loved the apartment. Well, she liked it. It was okay. It was affordable. She had wanted to move to the burbs and that had been the plan. But plans fall through just like promotions and new jobs and engagements and on and on and on. Plans fall through. Things don't work out. People let you down. Parents forget. The last one, the sting of it, brought more tears, and she looked down the hall to a partially closed door with a "No Girls Allowed" sign on it, written big with red marker. She should check on him, see how he was doing. But there were monitors and alarms and buzzers and things she would never understand to warn her if anything was wrong. The nurse had been by earlier and had checked in on him and said there had been no changes. He was fine. As fine as he'd ever be. Claudia should check on him, though. But she couldn't. Not today. Not tonight. She'd go in and see him tomorrow and read to him and wash him and tell her how much she loved him and missed him. She could do that on Saturdays and Sundays, but the rest of the week was just deadlines and traffic and packed buses. All she could do during the week was kiss his forehead in the morning and say a prayer for him at bedtime. She couldn't be there for him. But there was a rotating cast of nurses that came to spend the days with him until she could get home. Part of a settlement her lawyer had forced the two families to take because that was as good as it was going to get. Enough money to get her out of the city and into the burbs and care for him the rest of his life. However long that might be. However long. She prayed she'd walk in some morning to check in on him, or some evening to say goodnight, and he'd just be gone, lost to the dreaming deep, embraced by a slumbering sea where he would always be 10 years old and full of chaos, mystery, and love. She wiped her face and turned away from the hallway and his door and turned her attention to the front door. She looked at the clock on the stove, barely visible through the marinara spatters from long gone but long gone dinner and saw it was 5 after 9. Knock, knock. 2 knocks, then silence beyond the front door. Claudia turned and looked back down the hallway towards the bedrooms and thought she saw her son's door move gently, as if from a breeze, but she didn't have time to think more on it. She had someone waiting for her on the other side of another door, so she started walking backwards and then spun as she reached her destination. She took the bag of chocolates in her left hand and put her right hand on the doorknob, then closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She turned the knob and opened the door, dropping her eyes as she did. At first there was nothing, just silence. But she felt the person there, the child, even if she didn't see them. Even if they weren't really a child anymore. She felt their presence and knew if she could open her eyes not in her head but in her heart, in her mother's soul, she would see a 10-year-old boy dressed in a superhero outfit waiting for her. She knew the costume well, even if she wasn't looking directly at the boy. He was the Southern Gentleman, an older hero, but Gavin's favorite, one of the first black superheroes in comics. When he was 5, Claudia had gotten her son a box of old comics from a comic shop because he was really starting to fall in love with reading. Of all the comics, of all the superheroes and spacemen, it was the Southern Gentleman that resonated with him. So she had slowly tracked the other issues down for him over the coming months. Gavin had made the costume himself. The gentleman was a slave who had been hit by a meteor while out working the fields, and he had gained the ability to see people's true hearts and to show it to them. The man, who they had never named in the comics, freed himself after his experience with the meteor and gave himself a new name, and now free. The Southern Gentleman went from plantation to plantation, freeing the slaves there, not through force of violence, but with the truth of the heart, which shattered literally the plantation owners. The comic only lasted 8 issues before it was canceled. To Claudia, it felt more like a fairy tale than a superhero story, but she had to admit that it had its charm, and Gavin absolutely loved it. He loved the Southern Gentleman, and when Gavin told her that was who he wanted to be for Halloween, she smiled and told him it sounded wonderful. She'd helped him find a big old cowboy hat that was supposed to look like a Confederate general's hat, and when she spray painted gray, and then she got him a nice church outfit and sprayed that silver. The Southern Gentleman was like a living ghost and shimmered with the power of the meteor and the power of real truth. Shimmered silver with it. And Gavin's costume was strange, and not at all like the Southern Gentleman's, but when he had it on, he was that man, that great, strange, ethereal superhero. Gavin was so excited for Halloween, sleeping in his costume for 3 nights in a row, after it was done and only taking it off when Claudia warned him he might damage it. He was so excited, and then she forgot completely when Halloween finally came. She was trying so damned hard to get a promotion at work, was putting in long hours and nightly overtime only to have the job given to someone else, given to a man that had only been with the company for 6 months. A man that looked like her boss, who laughed like her boss, and who looked at women the way her boss did. She had sacrificed so much for that promotion, even so far as to sacrifice her son in the end, because when she forgot to come home that night to take him out, Gavin took himself out trick-or-treating, all by himself. He knew better. She knew he knew better. She knew he shouldn't go out without her, but this was his favorite night of the year, and he had worked so hard to become the Southern Gentleman, and when she didn't answer her phone and wasn't home by 8, he went out. She knew this because their next-door neighbor saw him exit the building from out his window and had called Claudia as well to tell her, but she had her phone on silent, and she didn't get the call. And poor Gavin, he went out into the night on his own. Gavin made it 3 blocks and visited a phone store and a deli before 2 white boys from the suburbs came upon him as he was leaving the bodega where Claudia got their groceries. They asked Gav who he was supposed to be dressed up as, and he happily told them, these 2 young men dressed in their football jerseys, far away from their own neighborhood, out to raise hell in the city. The 2 teens laughed, and one of them pushed Gav while the other took his candy bag and told him to take his black ass home, and that there were no such things as black superheroes. Claudia knew all of this because the nice woman who ran the bodega heard it all and called the police and was about to go shoo the two boys away but before she could, Gav had said something to the boys, and some sort of scuffle broke out, and Gavin was left lying limp in the gutter with blood coming out of his head as the two boys ran down the sidewalk away from him. The police caught the boys just as they were trying to drive out of the city, and both insisted that they hadn't done anything wrong, and they were just being harassed because they were white. Too many people had seen the two teens harassing the boy, who was little for his age, and then saw one of them push him hard, and the little boy had tripped over pant legs too long that Claudia had meant to hem, and had fallen into the gutter and hit his head on the curb. It took 15 minutes for an ambulance to arrive, and by the time he had stopped moving. He was alive, technically. The parents of the boys settled. The boys wrote an apology and swore it was an accident that Gavin had caused. The judge sentenced them to parole so their lives wouldn't be further harmed from a simple mistake, and little Gavin was lost in the Halloween sea, never to return. So she thought. Only he did return, once every year for the past 5 years on Halloween night. Always on Halloween night. Trick or treat. The small, soft voice came from before her. Claudia opened her eyes and looked up, and for a moment he was before her, dressed in the Southern gentleman costume and smiling, his pillowcase held out to her patiently. He wavered and was gone, but she felt him there still, waiting for her, watching her. Christ almighty, the tears came hard, and she didn't try to stop them. She ached so badly for him, for this part of him that was lost, wandering alone through the dark places between years, but returning every Halloween. And she knew that even if she moved 1,000 miles away, he'd find her, though she'd never leave, just in case. She didn't want him to get lost again. Not again. Never again. She wiped the tears away and with the heel of her palm and reached into the bag of chocolate and pulled out a handful and held them out. Gavin reappeared and she dropped the candy into his pillowcase. He shimmered, he wavered, he smiled at his mother. She returned it and reached an arm out to him, but he was gone. The air turned cold around her and she shivered and let out a sob. From behind her, she heard a door close gently. His door. She stood in the open doorway and a group of young ghouls came trotting up the stairs at the end of the hall, and when one saw her standing there with her bag of candy, the 5 of them came running towards her, laughing and happy for one last stop for the night. Claudia forced a smile as the kids approached her, but her eyes were never on them. They were down the hall looking for an adult that wasn't there, a parent that hadn't accompanied them. Where were their parents? She wondered as she gave out the candy and watched them run down the hall towards an apartment near the stairs. For a moment she saw Gavin among them, running with them, laughing with them. He turned back to look at his mother and started to raise his hand, and then was gone until next Halloween. Happy Halloween, baby, Claudia whispered and went back into her apartment for a drink. Happy Halloween, friends. Stay safe. Try to enjoy the holiday as much as you can. If you want more of my podcasts, you can find them on spookychris.com, as well as other stories, other podcasts with Halloween stories and other stuff, and links to all of my books, which are always good for a late fall chill. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.